Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video, and subsequently visiting my channel. Uh, the topic of this video is going to be on theories of origin and behavior. And or a hypothesis of origin and behavior, and what's a theory or a hypothesis of origin and behavior? I'm sure most people are familiar with the um, idea that, well, take the newest Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix. This movie tries to portray an explanation for the character of the Joker through personal hardship and psychological disturbance and all of these various things. It's an origin story, and to me, it's utterly bullshit. And why is it utterly bullshit? Well, you have to understand something about human outcomes in terms of achievements, whether that's positive achievement or negative achievement. And I understand we're dealing with superheroes and things like that. But the reason I want to attack this or portray this first is because it's something that's a common explanation for why somebody does anything bad or good these days. That if you take a person and put them under a certain set of conditions, then they are going to certainly become this thing. And that's just really, 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 really bad understanding of human psychology and biology. That's not true, okay? And so, in particular, what I hope to say is that when you look at achievement or outcome, it's the case that the exception is the exception. And what I mean by that is that anytime somebody sits as an outlier for a certain data set, you would not be able to attribute the outcomes of that outlier to the same set of factors that are a part of the normal distributive points within the mapping of your data set. So, for example, if you try to, I guess, measure people, say you come up with a certain set of factors that are responsible for people's ability to taste whatever sugar and a certain dish or something like that. And then you do your randomized controlled experiment and everything like that. And you notice that everybody can taste up to a certain milligram of sugar and so on and so forth, and a food. They can correlate the ratio to how sweet it tastes with however many milligrams were put into the damn thing from the beginning and so on and so forth, and then has a certain kind of accuracy deal, confidence interval, and so on and so forth. I'm kind of botching the statistics. I'm just trying to, with the statistical example, but I'm just trying to come up with a quick dirty example to get the point across. Then say out of that sample, you notice everybody tends to hover around a certain grade. There are some people that don't quite make it, and there are some people that are just a little above what's normal, and then there are those people that are can't taste anything at all, and then there are those people that can taste sugar to a degree where you're just like, what's going on? And so the people that can't taste anything at all, they're not typical. You can't use, or at least like, if you were to take all of those individuals and then try to test them for whatever you think are your relevant factors, it's not to say that whatever factors you've picked for this is what would allow people to understand and predict for how well most people can taste sugar are not valid. What that may mean, and that's why in statistical analysis you're allowed to throw out certain, given a certain sample size, allowed to throw out certain things because it doesn't necessarily negate the factors that you've picked out. What that tells you is that there are cases, everything's on a gradient, and maybe when you get to these extreme cases, there are a particular set of factors that are unique to those extreme cases that are not descriptions of the norm. And that's what you want to really tease. That's why you want to throw those things out whenever you're thinking about what goes on with the normative population, and why when you look at those individuals, you do not treat them like the normative population. Though they may tell you things about the norm, you do not treat them like that. And similar to whenever you're evaluating, why does David Bukowski or Ted Bundy or Carl Panzram become serial killers? It is not simply because they came from abusive homes. That's not true. I mean, that's a necessary condition. Like, people, and that's one of the things you can say about these origin stories, or these ideas that everything has its basis in early childhood or origins, or psychological origins from early childhood. That's a Freudian theory. That Freudian theory is not empirically correct. And why is that Freudian theory not empirically correct? Because people are not blank slates. And two, also because people misunderstand what's a necessary condition versus what a sufficient condition is. And it may be necessary for somebody to have experience abuse and so on and so forth, but that does not necessarily get you a serial killer. And it's not the case that every person, so take for example the profile of the character in the Joker movie. Most people like the Joker character in the Joaquin Phoenix version of the Joker, not the Christopher Nolan, Heath Ledger character Joker. Most people like that are not going to become the Joker. 9 out of 10 times, even if they go through everything he went through, they're not going to become the Joker. Why are they not going to become the Joker? Because, well, life is random, and there's certain biological factors that make it such that somebody would become that. It's also why it's the case that if you hear somebody say something like absolute power corrupts absolutely, that's bullshit too, you know? It's like, not everybody, so think about so I guess like this. What would one want to think about these kinds of hypotheses and theories? They make sense up to a point, or they make the most sense for people who are, relatively like they're normative. I mean, just for people who are neurotypical and things like that. If you know somebody who's typical in most ways and then they do something funny, chances are there's some kind of encounter that shaped them behaviorally that gets them to behave like that. But whenever it's the case that you notice somebody is not, emotionally regular and so on and so forth, and they do various odd things, there's more than one kind of odd thing that they tend to do, or there's more than a few characteristics that tend to coincide with a certain set of peculiar behaviors, whether whether people consider them positively exceptional or negatively exceptional. That's just not due to childhood. That's not just due to rearing. That's not just due to experience. You don't get people to become Julius Caesar or from just being through the same kind of developmental experiences Julius Caesar was a part of. Similarly, you're not going to get Caligula, you're not going to get Nero, you're not going to get certain kinds of these crazy Roman emperors just from, an abusive childhood. Now, it's definitely the case that an abusive childhood can contribute to certain maladaptive features, but I mean, there have been plenty of people. Take David Bukowski, for example, the son of Sam. Take David Bukowski, for example. David Bukowski, he's given up for adoption as a child, and then his stepmother dies, the only person really whom he's close with. He turns out to be a serial killer. Take Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday is an adoptive child, and I believe Michael Faraday's stepmom. Can't get the facts right now. Can't recall it perfectly, but can say that for the most part, Michael Faraday had a very similar life to David Bukowski, different time period and things like that, but similar personalities, introverted, not very similar personalities. That's the only thing I can say. Physiologically, they turn out to be different people. Maybe comparing apples to oranges here. What I should say, and why do I hesitate even in my analysis of those two people? Because initial conditions matter, man. How tall somebody is, how big somebody is, and their body dimensions whether or not they're introverted, whether or not they were born, when computers were popular or prior to computers being popular, whether or not they have a certain kind of IQ, whether or not they're open, whether or not they're agreeable, whether or not all of these sorts of things that people don't particularly get to choose whenever they're born into a certain setting, those things determine to a large extent what they become ultimately. And that's why it doesn't, even if every person has a certain capacity for malevolence, most people are not turning into a serial killer, not even with the same kinds of experiences alone that Nero or Caligula or David Panzram or David Bukowski or Ted Bundy or Ted Kaczynski, you name it. They're exceptions. It's like everybody is not going to be Hitler. That's just not going to be true. Not everybody's going to be Stalin or anything like that. Though that's the kind of description that people like to give. And I think, part of the reason why people tend to make those conclusions in the first place is because either people ascribe to a certain type of behavioralistic thinking that's not empirically valid. People who are of a certain liberal political orient don't tend to like to think of people as blank slates. People too do recognize that there are some more similarities among people than there are differences. And people too also, I think, recognize that you don't just get somebody being, Ted Kaczynski because they come out of the womb a psychopath or a sociopath. There are plenty of psychopaths and sociopaths that are born, per se. Well, okay, so let's talk about psychopaths and sociopaths for a bit, because I guess we're just talking about these things right now. So let's take a psychopath. Psychopath is genetic. There's nothing you can do about that. I mean, not all of them turn out to be serial killers. Now, why is it the case that all psychopaths turn out to be serial killers? Because for them to be born without, I guess, the ability to feel guilty and a certain set of negative emotions that we would ascribe to the framework of empathy, and I'm not going to get into this science of empathy because, well, it's rather complicated, and it's the case that you do need negative emotions to be empathic, and guilt is one of them. And that's certainly something that psychopaths do not have. They do not experience guilt, so they do not necessarily feel positively or what most people would associate with empathy or sympathy. I don't know, whichever one you want to call it. Like, it's either or. They don't feel sympathy or empathy. And so, every person that's like that, are they going to become Charles Manson or something like that? No. And then let's talk about Charles Manson, because Charles Manson and Ted Bundy are not really psychopaths. What they are sociopaths. Will every person become a sociopath or a narcissist, because they're very similar? No, they won't. Partly because you need a bit of extroversion and you need a little bit of kind of a manic personality to begin with in order to get those people. But it's not to say that there aren't environmental factors that make sociopaths. Sociopaths they're not born that way. Nor are narcissists. Sociopathy and narcissism aren't born as those people, but they're born with the capacity to be certain things given the right pressures. I'll just put it like that. And they scored wrong. They had a bad hand, and that's how they got to be who they were, per se. But that's not everybody. It's like, and I hate it when people make those kinds of statements or conclusions about things. The world's a complicated place. In certain instances, these things matter. In certain instances, they don't matter. There's not a one size fits all kind of description or way of analyzing everything, even if it's a personality disorder, even if it's an emotional or behavioral kind of thing. There's no one size fits all. The particulars matter in every freaking case, and you have to treat human behavior and achievement and certain things like that case by case, and not even every factor, because it's like, take for example, well, whatever. We're gonna stick with it at that place, and so it's why if you hear somebody say, so take for, okay, so like the thought experiment that I've been thinking about with this is like, if you hear anybody say something like absolute power corrupts absolutely, then ask them this question. You know, what if you took somebody who was, all right, so why does that have some grain of truth to it? You know, why does that have some grain of truth to it? Partly because human morality is contingent on certain factors of, let's just call it, reputation. So people behave a certain kind of way because there's accountability within the social structures or the relational matrix that they find themselves being a part of. Other people are not going to be pleased with me if I do X, Y, and Z, and it makes me feel good when these people like me, and it makes me feel bad when these people don't like me, and that's what most people feel. And that's what motivates us to be moral, per se. Now, if it's the case, though, that you're more disagreeable or something like that, you may not care about those feelings, and so it may be the case that you're willing to behave more badly in a social manner than other more agreeable people are willing to behave, per se, you know, or at least I should just say antisocial. We just like to tend to think about things in a certain kind of way because of Christian landscape. But let's just put it like that. You may tend to be okay with being antisocial, and you know, because there's advantage in being antisocial. It's called getting your way and what you want, and so you know, it's the case that whenever you're thinking about, well, why would somebody act out a certain set of behaviors, there's, you know, a bit of a framework underneath that. Now, take that idea and understand that that's valid, per se, that you do have it the case that people are going to be as moral as they are capable of being in terms of their basic temperamental framework, and as much as there is accountability within the environment. You know, you need accountability and personality. Those are the two things that really make for it. And when you give somebody absolute power, the only thing you have left is personality. And so, you know, like the only thing you have left is personality and behavior. So somebody's behavior or character, that's what you can call somebody's character. So the sets of behaviors that people, if you don't have any accountability, the only thing you have left with a human being is their personality and the set of behaviors that they've practiced up to that point in time. And maybe they're going to learn some new behaviors to act out, but guess what? Those behaviors are going to just be from the source and the root of their personality and the behaviors that they have already thus far. Unless they see something that's advantageous. You know, it's why I like the idea that no individual can be something without the influence of other people. You're always referring to other people in the landscape. You're always referring to what this person's doing over there because maybe they have something that's beneficial for you and it's going to encourage you to change yourself in a certain way. Or maybe you admire somebody or something like that, and so you have this aspirational component that draws you to something or another. You know, what is the point of all of that? The point of all that is to say that absolute power does not corrupt absolutely. You have other people influencing one another. You have the lack of influence of other people. You have other people's personality. You have people's personalities. You have a lack of accountability, per se. But ultimately, because all people are mortal, there's no such thing as a lack of accountability. You know, like maybe things are bad for a while because you have a dictator or something like that, but somebody's going to kill them. I mean, that's just what always happens. Let's just put it like, let me also spin it to you like this with this thought experiment. So that's what's true about the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That, you know, if you have a pretty problematic personality with some iffy character traits with respects to being a leader or having a lot of political and social power and freedom, then yes, they will be corrupted because they're basically not something that could behave good if they wanted to, you know, if they were even conscious of it, you know. Then now let's go to the other side of things. Could you take, this is going to be so politically incorrect, but I don't care. Think about somebody with Down syndrome. Do you think if you gave somebody, do you think if you made, let's say, there's probably going to be different kinds of problems with this, but if you made somebody with Down syndrome the president of the United States, it's not like they're going to probably offend a lot of people per se. You know, they're not going to be Donald Trump or something like that. Let's just take the presidents of the United States for God's sakes. You know, it's like Donald Trump is a particular kind of person. You know, Abraham Lincoln was a particular kind of person. Woodrow Wilson was a particular kind of person. Richard Nixon was a particular kind of person. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. Teddy Roosevelt and so on and so forth. There's personality, you know? It's not just there's personality in history, in biology, and all that stuff combined. It's not a particular position. A position, a power, a force, something like that does not make people what they are. That's just not what it does. What it does is it gives people the opportunity to express themselves, you know, or it gives them the freedom to explore who they are, per se. Let's just put it like that. And it's why I have this thinking that, you know, if religion was around or wasn't around, the only thing that would be true about people is that good people would be good people, from what we like to think of good people, and bad people would be bad people, you know? You need religion to get not halfway like bad people. By bad people, I just mean whatever traits a societal structure doesn't value, per se. This is a general sort of thing. People who do things that most people don't like, you need religion to kind of motivate them to do things that are different. People who are good people, you need religion and certain visions and ideas, or whether they're political ideologies, whatever. Political ideologies, religions, and so on and so forth, they just motivate people to do things that differ from their fundamental motivations. They're social pressures that can really hem people in to amend their behaviors and make them act amicably to a certain set of goals, per se. And so, you know, if you didn't have those things, then the only thing you'd have is human motivation and whatever sort of things people pick up from one another, and the history of their behavior and consequences through social learning and so on and so forth. But that all just is social learning. The thought experiments always break down because, well, human nature. It's complicated, but the idea that origin stories are relevant outside of the point of maybe the only time you should pay attention to an origin story is if you are genuinely like the person that it's talking about. Because then maybe you can see things about yourself, per se. If that person has a similar personality to you, similar set of background experiences, or, you know, similar IQ and a lot of other things, then yeah, maybe pay attention to them, because maybe it's the case that that is something that could be true about you if you're put in a similar situation, if you're not careful. You know, if you care about those things to begin with, you know. But don't, I don't know. People are idiots. That's the best thing I can say, I guess. You know, so that's a random video. Absolute power does not corrupt absolutely, and the origin of somebody does not necessarily determine what the initial conditions may, but the origin or their childhood trauma is not going to determine who a person becomes ultimately, you know. Though those are kind of tropes that we like very much. But, alright, that's my video, and thank you for watching.